I've never been good at confessions, yet here I am at 49, sitting with a glass of Cabernet, watching the Seattle rain trace patterns down my window, ready to spill everything. Some stories burn inside until you have to let them out. This is mine. It's been 18 months since that night at Sundance. 18 months since Nina Sullivan turned my carefully reconstructed life inside out. I keep telling myself that what happened was inevitable, that when two people connect the way we did, the universe doesn't give you much choice in the matter. But that's not entirely true, is it? We always have choices. I made mine. When Mark left after 22 years of marriage, or rather, when I finally pushed him out the door after realizing I'd become nothing more than a character sketch in the screenplay of his life, I promised myself I wouldn't disappear into someone else again. 3 years I spent rebuilding myself, piece by piece. My work at the studio became my salvation. I threw myself into producing films that meant something, stories that resonated with truth. I rediscovered photography, started kayaking on weekends, found a rhythm to my days that felt sustainable, if not exactly thrilling. Then came that January evening in Park City. The Q&A session had run long, and I was tired of smiling professionally at people who wanted something from me. Distribution deals, connections, validation. When they seated a late arrival at our table, this woman with wild red curls and a vintage Leica around her neck, I barely looked up from my notes. "That was brilliant. What you said about character authenticity being the backbone of independent cinema," she said, sliding into the chair beside me. I glanced up, prepared to offer my standard networking smile, but something in her eyes stopped me. They were green, not the soft pastoral green that people write poems about, but the fierce green of wild things, of forests in storm. "Nina Sullivan," she said, extending her hand. "I write about films that make me feel something." Her hand was cool in mine, her grip confident. "Dana Morgan, I produce films that I hope make people feel something." She laughed then, a sound so genuine it seemed almost out of place in that room full of industry calculation. Perfect match, then. We ended up at a small bar 3 blocks away, our breath clouding in the January air as we walked, talking about Claire Denise and Wong Kar-wai, as if they were mutual friends whose gossip we were exchanging. The crowd noise faded as we claimed a corner table, and somehow I found myself telling this virtual stranger about my years with Mark, how I'd slowly disappeared into the background of my own life, how I'd woken up one day and couldn't remember the last time I'd made a decision purely for myself. "That's the tragedy no one warns you about," Nina said, swirling amber liquid in her glass. "How you can disappear by inches, so slowly you don't notice until you're almost gone." She told me about Rachel, the woman who'd vanished from her life without explanation after 3 years together. How she'd channeled her grief into a series of essays examining heartbreak through the lens of cinema. "Film is the most honest art form," she said. "It shows us ourselves in a way we can bear to look." I remember thinking how luminous she looked in that dim light, how her hands moved when she spoke about films she loved, how she listened with her entire body leaned forward as if my words were water and she was parched. It was almost midnight when we realized we'd been talking for hours. The bar was emptying around us. "I'm flying back to San Francisco tomorrow," she said, and I felt an irrational disappointment. "I've got 3 more days here," I replied, then added impulsively, "but I'm often in the Bay Area for work." She smiled, pulling out her phone. "Then we should definitely continue this conversation." I expected the usual networking follow-up, maybe an email with a professional opportunity thinly disguised. Instead, 2 days later, she sent me a link to an obscure French film from the 70s with a message. "This reminded me of what you said about liminal spaces. Watch it when you're back in Seattle and tell me if I'm right." And so it began. For 3 months, we exchanged films and thoughts, and gradually, pieces of ourselves. I sent her photographs I'd taken. Fog rolling over Lake Washington, the intricate details of ferry machinery, shadows in alleyways, images I rarely showed anyone. She sent me drafts of her writing, essays that stripped cinema bare and examined its bones with unflinching honesty. In March, I had a meeting with a director in San Francisco. I texted her on impulse, "In your city tomorrow." "Dinner?" We met at a small Moroccan place in the Mission. She wore a vintage dress that seemed to belong to another era and had replaced her film camera with a digital one. For everyday documentation, she explained. The film is for moments that matter. Over couscous and wine, I realized something had shifted in our correspondence. There was an undercurrent, a tension that hadn't been there before. Our fingers brushed when reaching for bread, and neither of us pulled away immediately. Her eyes held mine a beat too long when she laughed. After dinner, we walked through the city, and she showed me her San Francisco. Not the postcard version, but the hidden corners, the murals tucked away in alleys, the bookstore with the owner who remembered what she'd purchased 5 years ago. I should get back to my hotel, I said eventually, though I didn't want the night to end. Or you could see my apartment, she suggested. I have a '68 Barolo that needs appreciation and a collection of film posters you'd probably find interesting. Her apartment was exactly what I'd imagined. Books everywhere, film posters carefully framed, a record player instead of a sophisticated sound system. A cat named Truffaut greeted us with aristocratic indifference. We sat on her balcony with the wine, looking out at the city lights, and somewhere between discussing Italian neo-realism and sharing stories about our first cameras, she reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. I've been wanting to do that all night, she said softly. 22 years with Mark, and I'd forgotten what it felt like to have my heart hammer against my ribs, to feel that sweet, terrifying vertigo of possibility. I was 49 years old, for God's sake. I should have been beyond this adolescent flutter. Dana, she said, I don't want to misread this. I looked at her, really looked at her. 10 years younger than me, brilliant, with a life rooted in a different city, in many ways a different world from mine. I'm not sure what this is, I admitted, but I'd like to find out. When she kissed me, it was like watching a foreign film without subtitles. I didn't need translation to understand the meaning. Her lips were soft, tentative at first, then more insistent. My hands found their way to her hair, those wild curls I'd been wanting to touch since that first night. I stayed. We talked until 3 a.m, trading stories and kisses, discovering each other in the half-light of her bedroom. There was an urgency tempered by tender exploration, the meeting of two people who had spent too long navigating loneliness. Morning brought clarity and complications. I had a flight to catch, a studio to run in Seattle. She had her life in San Francisco, her writing deadlines, her established routines. So what now? She asked, making coffee in her tiny kitchen, wearing my shirt from the night before. Now we figure it out, I said, though I had no idea what that meant. April and May became a blur of weekend flights, late-night phone calls, and daily texts. We established a rhythm. I would fly down one weekend, she would come up the next. The spaces between became harder to bear. I found myself distracted in meetings, checking my phone for messages from her. Films I was passionate about suddenly felt secondary to this new storyline unfolding in my life. It was Rachel who complicated things. Nina's ex remained a specter between us, not because Nina still loved her, but because the wound of being abandoned without explanation had left her wary. Sometimes I would reach for her, and she would be somewhere else, her mind caught in the undertow of old pain. I'm afraid, she admitted one night, as we lay tangled in my sheets, Seattle rain providing a soundtrack. I'm afraid that one day you'll realize this was just an experiment, a deviation from your normal life. This is my normal life now, I told her, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in years, but distance is its own antagonist. By June, the constant travel was wearing on both of us. I had a major project entering production. She had a book deadline looming. The calls grew shorter, the texts less frequent. Maybe we need to talk about what we're doing, she said during one tense phone conversation. Really talk about it. I knew what she meant. Someone would have to move. Someone would have to reshape their life around the other. At 49, with a career I'd built from the ashes of my marriage, the thought terrified me. Then came July, and everything changed. Katie Gardner has been my best friend since college. We survived our 20s together. She was maid of honor at my wedding, and she held me together through my divorce. She's the one constant in my adult life, the person who knows all my stories, who has seen me at my best and worst. When she invited me to her lake house for the 4th of July, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to introduce her to Nina. "Bring your film critic," she said. "I'm dying to meet the woman who's got you flying up and down the coast like a yo-yo." I invited Nina, expecting resistance given her book deadline, but she surprised me. "I'd love to meet your friends," she said. "Besides, I could use a break from staring at my manuscript." The lake house was gorgeous, a modernist structure of glass and cedar on the eastern shore of Lake Chelan. Katie and her husband Paul had invited their usual crowd, about 15 people total, most of whom I'd known for years. I was nervous bringing Nina into this established circle, especially since I hadn't explicitly told everyone that we were whatever we were. Nina, however, was in her element. She charmed Paul with her knowledge of obscure westerns, discussed camera techniques with Katie's brother, who worked in advertising, and by the bonfire that night, she had somehow gotten Katie's teenage daughter to open up about her interest in documentary filmmaking. "She's something else," Katie said, pulling me aside as we prepared snacks in the kitchen. "I haven't seen you like this in, maybe ever." "Like what?" "Lit up from the inside. Even with Mark, you were always a bit contained." I watched through the window as Nina helped Paul with the grill, laughing at something he said. "It's complicated," I sighed. "The distance, our work, the fact that I'm 10 years older." "Oh, please!" Katie rolled her eyes. "The only complication I see is that you're scared out of your mind because this is real." The next day was scorching. Most of us spent it in the lake, swimming and paddleboarding. Nina wore a vintage-inspired swimsuit that made her look like she'd stepped out of a 50s film, her pale skin already pinkening despite liberal applications of sunscreen. I caught myself watching her more than was probably appropriate, remembering how that skin felt under my fingers. That evening, after dinner, someone suggested we take the boats out to watch fireworks from the water. Paul and Katie took their motorboat with several guests. Nina and I, along with Katie's brother and his wife, opted for kayaks. The lake was beautiful at twilight, the water turning to liquid gold as the sun set. Nina and I paddled out a bit further than the others, finding a quiet spot where we could still see the area where fireworks would be launched. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said, her kayak drifting close to mine. "I feel like I'm getting to see all these pieces of you I hadn't met yet." "And what's the verdict?" She smiled, that smile that still made my heart skip. "The verdict is that Dana Morgan is even more fascinating in 3 dimensions than I'd imagined." When the fireworks began, exploding above us in brilliant bursts of color, Nina reached across the space between our kayaks and took my hand. And there, with her fingers laced through mine, and her face illuminated in flashes of red and blue and gold, I knew. "I love you," I said, the words escaping before I could consider their weight or consequence. She went very still, her eyes widening. For a terrible moment, I thought I'd made a catastrophic error. Then she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." She took a deep breath. "Is this real for you? Not just now, but as a life?" "Because I can't do temporary, Dana. I've done temporary, and it broke me." Above us, the fireworks continued their percussive beauty, reflecting in the dark water all around us. It's the most real thing I've felt in my life," I told her. "And it terrifies me, because I don't know how to make it work logistically. But I know I want to try." "Ask me," she said quietly. "Ask you what?" "Ask me to move to Seattle." The world seemed to pause, suspended between one heartbeat and the next. "Would you?" I whispered. "I've been thinking about it for weeks," she admitted. "My work can happen anywhere, and the rain in your city makes for excellent reading weather." Later, I would remember how the finale of fireworks erupted overhead as I maneuvered my kayak closer to hers, nearly tipping us both into the lake as I kissed her. How we laughed as we steadied ourselves, how the distant cheers from other boats seemed meant for us. That night, in the small guest room with its creaky bed, we made love with a new urgency, as if sealing a pact. Her hands traced promises across my skin. My lips mapped a future against hers. Afterward, as she slept, I watched moonlight silvering her red curls and wondered at how life could turn on a dime. How at 49 I could feel reborn. The next morning, Katie found me alone on the deck, coffee in hand, watching the lake come alive with early boaters. "So," she said, settling beside me, "when's she moving in?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "How did you—" "Please, I've known you since you were 20. Also, thin walls." She smirked. Heat rushed to my face. "God, Katie." "I'm happy for you," she said, suddenly serious. "But Dana, this is a big change. Are you sure?" I thought about the question. Was I sure? Number I was terrified. I'd spent 3 years learning to be alone after my marriage. Letting someone in, really in, meant risk. What if it didn't work? What if Nina realized that daily life with me wasn't as exciting as our weekend interludes? What if I lost myself again? But then Nina appeared in the doorway, sleep-rumpled and beautiful, and something settled in my chest. "I'm not sure of much," I told Katie, "but I'm sure of her." August was a whirlwind. Nina found a subletter for her San Francisco apartment and began the process of moving her life north. I cleared out my guest room to create an office for her, painted the walls the exact shade of green she loved, installed bookshelves for her extensive collection of film books and criticism. We argued, our first real fight, about whether her vintage poster of the 400 Blows belonged in the living room or the office. "This is harder than I expected," she admitted one night, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. "I keep thinking about all the things I'm leaving behind." A cold fear gripped me. "Are you having second thoughts?" She shook her head. "Not about us. Never about us. But about belonging, I guess. San Francisco has been my home for 12 years. I understood then that loving someone meant making space for their grief as well as their joy. That night, we sat on our balcony, and I held her while she cried for what she was letting go. Then we made a list of all the Seattle places and experiences I wanted to share with her, all the ways the city could become hers too. By September, we'd established new routines. She took over the corner cafe, 3 blocks from our apartment, as her writing space. I adjusted to coming home to someone, to the wonderful shock of another person's presence after years of solitude. We learned each other's irritating habits, her tendency to leave half-full coffee cups everywhere, my compulsive need to plan everything 2 weeks in advance. But we also discovered unexpected joys. Nina singing off-key in the shower, weekend kayaking expeditions, where she would photograph the play of light on water while I paddled. The shared language we developed, references and inside jokes that needed no explanation. In October, Rachel resurfaced. An email, innocuous on the surface. She was coming to Seattle for a film festival, had seen Nina's name associated with a local publication, wondered if she'd like to get coffee. I found Nina staring at her laptop, gone pale beneath her freckles. 3 years of silence, and now she wants coffee, she said, her voice tight. "What do you want to do?" I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral, though my stomach clenched with anxiety. Nina looked up at me, her eyes searching my face. Part of me wants to see her, to ask why she disappeared, to show her that I survived, that I'm happy now. She reached for my hand. But a bigger part knows that whatever she says won't change anything. I'm not that person anymore. She declined the invitation, politely but firmly. That night, as we lay in bed, she whispered, "Thank you for not telling me what to do." "I trust you," I said simply, "and I trust us." The holidays approached, our first as a couple. Nina threw herself into creating new traditions, stringing white lights throughout the apartment, insisting we get a real tree, even though I'd used an artificial one for years. "Christmas smells matter, Dana," she declared, dragging me to a tree lot in the pouring rain. We spent Thanksgiving with Katie and her family, Christmas with Nina's brother and his husband in Portland. New Year's Eve we celebrated alone, opening that bottle of champagne I'd been saving for a special occasion, dancing in our living room to Nina's eclectic vinyl collection. "Any resolutions?" she asked as midnight approached. I thought about the year behind us and the one ahead. "Just one," I said. "To keep choosing this, choosing us, every day." She smiled, that smile that still undid me. "That's a good one. I think I'll borrow it." As the countdown reached 0 and fireworks bloomed over Elliott Bay, I kissed her. this woman who had reshaped my world in ways I was still discovering. In that moment, I understood that love at 49 wasn't the same as love at 20 or 30. It came with history, with the wisdom of past mistakes, with a clearer understanding of what mattered and what didn't. And now, 18 months after that first meeting, as I sit watching Seattle rain, I'm certain of one thing. This love story, my love story, didn't begin when I was young and unformed. It waited for me to become the woman who could recognize it, who could be brave enough to reach for it with both hands. Tomorrow is Nina's 40th birthday. She thinks we're going to dinner at her favorite restaurant, but I've planned something else. In my desk drawer is a small box containing a ring, not a diamond, which wouldn't suit her, but an emerald set in vintage gold that reminded me of her eyes that first night. I'm not sure what her answer will be. I'm not even sure what I want her answer to be. Only that I want to ask the question, to offer her everything I am and could be. Nina always says that the best stories don't end. They simply find a moment to pause, leaving the audience to imagine what comes next. So perhaps this isn't an ending at all, but a pause, a breath between what was and what might be. All I know is that at 49, I found the courage to start a new chapter. And whatever happens next, I'll never regret that night at Sundance when a woman with wild red curls and a vintage camera changed everything.